You've reached the end of our video series on writing with a more formal tone. In this video, we're going to address in particular the problem of wordiness or redundancy in your writing, which is a really common issue. Here's the thing. When we are speaking on a professional level, the expectations are very different than when we are writing professionally. So these videos, for instance, I have a general outline of what I know I want to go over in the videos, but I don't have them scripted because I don't want them to feel unnatural. And so that's fine for this mode of delivery. But if I were writing a guide on how to write more formally, you can bet that I would be using significantly fewer words to communicate the points. So we use fewer words in writing because we have more time to consider what is the best way to put words together into sentences to express this point. And in the revision process, normally when you start to look at your sentences and start to figure out how to express something a bit more clearly, what you end up doing is removing more things than you are adding. Because when you are less wordy, normally you are more clear because it means that you've taken the time to consider the best, most clear way to say something rather than just trying to repeat it in different ways in order to get the point across because your initial attempt wasn't that clear. All right, let's take a look at how to avoid wordiness in our writing by discussing some of the reasons that we tend to be wordy. One of the primary reasons is that we're repeating ourselves and padding our paper with empty phrases to fulfill some kind of length requirement. Let's look at an example. Bipolar disorder is a terrible and emotionally difficult mental illness that causes a lot of problems for the person suffering from it. Now, at first glance, this sentence might seem perfectly acceptable, but I want you to pause this video and take a moment to consider if there are any words or phrases here that aren't really adding anything informationally to our sentence and that we can simply remove. All right, let's break this down. So let's start with the word terrible. This is one of those very subjective words. It's kind of vague, could mean something different to you than it does to me, and we try to avoid that kind of wording in formal writing. We're also talking about an illness here, and we perceive pretty much all illnesses as negative anyway. So we don't really need that word. And then we say emotionally difficult. So again, all illnesses to some degree are going to be difficult. So we don't really need that expression. Then we say that it causes a lot of problems. Well, is there an illness that does not cause problems? I'm pretty sure if there were, we probably wouldn't call it an illness. And for the person suffering from it, well, obviously, the person who experiences a lot of the problems that result from an illness would be the person suffering from it. So we're saying a lot of things here that don't really mean anything, that don't really add any information. If we were to remove all of that, what would we be left with? Bipolar disorder is a mental illness. Ultimately, that's all we're saying in this sentence. Let's take a look at another one of the reasons that we tend to be wordy. Sometimes we don't realize we're being wordy because what we're doing is trying too hard to sound formal, and at times that's a good thing to try to do, but we overdo it and then we end up being unnecessarily wordy. Let's look at an example for that. Bipolar disorder, which is a trying mental illness endured by many, is unfortunately often undetected by friends and family members. It is imperative for people with bipolar disorder to recognize their symptoms and obtain a diagnosis because the illness often necessitates medication. It seems like I'm saying a lot here, and I am using some pretty good vocabulary, but I'm saying something fairly simple in an unnecessarily complicated way. Let's start by looking at things that we know we can remove from the sentence as we did last time. A trying mental illness. Trying is a better word than terrible, but it's still saying the same kind of thing as we were in the previous sentence. It's not something we really need to say. Obviously, it's a mental illness. It's going to be trying. And endured by many. Many is one of these vague terms. Unless we're actually going to provide numbers, there's no reason to say the word many. And then the word unfortunately, that's another one of these words that we want to avoid because it doesn't really add any information. It's just making a value judgment here. So let's remove all of those. But then what I'm left with is still worded in a way that could be simplified. That final sentence, it is imperative for people with bipolar disorder to recognize their symptoms and obtain a diagnosis because the illness often necessitates medication. The information there is fine, but it could be said in a simpler way. So let's look at our second revision here. Bipolar disorder is often undetected by friends and family members, but it is important to diagnose the condition in order to properly treat it. What we've done by simplifying what we're saying, we haven't removed any of the meaning, and yet we've made it easier for the reader to understand the point. Let's look at another reason we tend to be wordy. Sometimes we're just early in the stage of the writing process and we don't have enough details yet. So we haven't really thought it through, we haven't done much research, and so we don't really have a lot to say, and we end up repeating ourselves. Bipolar disorder is a mental illness characterized by emotional highs and lows. This means that those who suffer from it can experience mania followed by depression. These highs and lows may be mild or severe, so the condition may be difficult to detect at first since the person may seem to just be energetic or having a rough day. What I'm doing here is I'm repeating the same idea multiple times in a few sentences. I already say that it's characterized by emotional highs and lows in the beginning. Then I use the words mania and depression, but those are just synonyms of the highs and lows. And then later on, I say that the person may seem to be energetic or having a rough day. Energetic is like the high or like the mania. Having a rough day is like the low or like the depression. So I've pretty much just said the same thing 3 times. So once again, I need to figure out what I can remove, and then with what I'm left with, figure out the best way to put it together. I'm actually going to remove the emotional highs and lows and keep the mania followed by depression because the words mania and depression are a bit more formal. They're more scientific. And then I'm also removing the energetic or having a rough day and the repetition in the middle of highs and lows. So now I'm left with bipolar disorder is a mental illness characterized by mania followed by depression. I've left the idea of mild or severe because the mania could be mild or severe, the depression could be mild or severe. That is new information. And the fact that it can be difficult to detect is also new information. But these don't work well together anymore as a sentence, so let's try to revise that in a way that makes sense. Bipolar disorder is a mental illness characterized by periods of mild or severe mania and depression. The symptoms may be difficult to detect at first. Simple, straightforward, clear. Another reason we tend to be wordy, we're writing the way that we speak. When we speak, we're always wordy. And when you write this way, it's really more like a free write, like brainstorming. You're letting your mind wander a little bit. And so naturally, you're going to end up saying a lot of things that you don't really need. Let's look at the example. Bipolar disorder is a terrible illness. It's a psychiatric illness where you can feel very energetic and excited one day and very depressed the next. You can't really control the feelings. People are more familiar with it today because of the film Silver Linings Playbook. It made people more aware of the problem. So we've got a few things here that we've seen before. We don't need the word terrible, for instance. We don't want to say something like where you, because the you is a personal pronoun that you would want to avoid since that's informal. And we're not talking about a place, so where isn't really the appropriate word. We might use it when we're talking, but it's not something we would want to write in this context. Very, the word very shows up here twice. And very is another one of those words to avoid. It's vague. Energetic and excited. Well, aren't those synonyms of each other? Couldn't we just use one of those 2 words? So you start to see a lot of the things that can be removed as far as individual wording. But then we've got an entire couple sentences here at the end about a film called Silver Linings Playbook. And that was just sort of stream of consciousness. It's not something we would include in a formal paper. So let's take a look at what we've removed here. We've got all those little phrases gone. Also removed the idea that you can't really control the feelings. Again, we don't want to use the word you, and if we could control the feelings, then it wouldn't be really much of a serious problem, right? And then we've removed the entire section about the film. But we still need to reword what we have left to have it make sense. So revision number 2, bipolar disorder is a psychiatric illness characterized by periods of mania and depression. So as you can see, there are multiple reasons why we might be wordy, and it's important for you to start trying to recognize if you tend to do any of these things and why you personally tend to do them. There may be just one reason that you are wordy sometimes, or there may be a combination of these reasons, but it's important to start spotting wordiness in your own writing. Take the advice of Dr. Seuss. So the writer who breathes more words than he needs is making a chore for the reader who reads. There you are. Words are your friends, but only use as many as necessary in order to make your point. So to recap this entire series on writing with a more formal tone, there's a few things that you want to avoid. Number 1, personal pronouns. Number 2, contractions. Number 3, using any vague sounding language. Number 4, cliches or overused expressions. And number 5, any sort of wordiness or redundancy in your writing. It takes time, it takes practice, but you'll get there if you keep at it. So good luck.